Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at healthcare from a totally different angle. We're not talking about the medicine, but the physical space. Okay, let's dive right into this. We're going to examine the meticulous, highly intentional design of a pediatric ward. Usually when we talk about healthcare and recovery, our minds immediately jump to the medicine, right? The doctors, the surgeries, the treatments. But what about the physical environment itself? We're going to explore how the actual hospital environment is specifically engineered, literally from the ground up, to support a sick child.
So that brings us to a really interesting question. What actually makes a hospital heal? It isn't just the medication in the IV drips or the charts at the end of the bed. For a vulnerable, sick child, the physical environment they're placed in plays a massive role in the recovery process. We have to shift our perspective here, away from just traditional clinical medicine, and look at environmental design. Just think about it for a second. How does the physical space around a child impact their well-being when they're already scared, feeling unwell, and far away from the comforts of their own home? How do we actually design a healing pediatric ward? Well, it takes deep, intentional brainstorming from architects and medical professionals working together. We aren't just building standard hospital rooms here. We are building a safe fortress for a child who is, let's be honest, probably very intimidated by the clinical world. Every single decision, from the walls to the floorboards, requires empathy and a real, deep understanding of pediatric needs. Section 1. A home-like hospital. So, the core idea here is that a sick child actually benefits most from a home-like environment. They've been completely uprooted from their normal lives, so the ultimate goal of the pediatric unit is to mimic that warm, comforting feeling of home as closely as possible. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast we need to achieve. Think about the standard adult hospital. It's sterile, dull, highly clinical, and honestly, a bit scary. Now contrast that with what a pediatric unit absolutely must be. It needs to be a happy, cheerful space. We're moving away from blank white walls and instead utilizing colorful walls adorned with suitable pictures, totally removing that intimidation factor. Transforming the visual vocabulary of a room can be remarkably simple. Vibrant, universally understood elements, like a bright strawberry, for instance, give a child something familiar and attractive to focus on instead of all that scary medical equipment. It gives them something bright and comforting to look at, which transforms a sterile medical room into a genuinely cheerful surrounding. Section 2. Safe and secure surroundings. Now, what's really interesting about this part is that every single physical detail in the room is heavily regulated to protect the patient. We aren't just tossing regular house furniture into these rooms. The attractive furniture must use fast colors, meaning absolutely no poisonous paints can be used. None. Furthermore, there can be no projections or sharp edges anywhere. A child might be unsteady on their feet or just playing around, so the floors must definitely not be slippery. Strict safety measures are literally woven right into the very physical shell of the room. But here's a crucial detail that often gets overlooked. The environment must meet the needs of the children and their parents. Parents are an absolutely integral part of this healing environment. When the physical space is pleasing, specifically through the strict maintenance of cleanliness and the orderliness of the furniture and equipment, it creates a sense of control and peace of mind for the whole family during a highly stressful time. It's simple, really. When the parents feel secure, the child feels more secure. Section 3. Controlling the clinical environment. Let's move on and see how this builds 3 invisible layers of protection. To perfectly calibrate this atmosphere, first, you need good lighting to banish gloom and keep the space from feeling dark and depressing. Second, there must be plenty of fresh air and good ventilation, but strictly without any drafts that could chill a vulnerable patient. And third, a perfectly comfortable temperature and humidity level must be maintained at all times. These invisible atmospheric factors act as a highly calibrated protective shield for the kids. So the crucial point here is spacing. 6 to 8, the spacing between any 2 beds in the pediatric unit must be exactly 6 to 8 feet. Now, why is this specific number so important? Well, it's not just for the privacy of the families. It's specifically to allow for adequate cleaning facilities to move between the beds easily and effectively. In this case, the architecture directly dictates the hygiene of the ward. It's a real game changer.
Section 4. Strict infection prevention. While we want the space to feel as much like a warm home as possible, we absolutely cannot forget that it is, at its core, a hospital. We have to establish strict boundaries to keep invisible enemies and cross-infections entirely out. The unit must be completely free from outside pests and animals. That means maintaining an environment with 0 flies, no mosquitoes, and absolutely no bed bugs.
Furthermore, cats and dogs are strictly not permitted inside. Maintaining the absolute highest level of infection control means keeping all of these potential vectors strictly outside to protect those compromised immune systems.
But what happens when an infection does enter the ward? Because, it happens. Well, the unit must have dedicated facilities for the isolation of infectious patients, as well as rigorous systems for the disinfection of articles used within the space. These are the essential methods required for preventing cross-infections from spreading from one child to another. Alongside this, the unit must always have provisions in place for the prevention of general accidents. It's a vital dual system of preventing both microscopic and macroscopic harm.
Section 5. The power of play. Healing isn't just physical, right? It's emotional too. Toys, music, and television are often thought of as mere entertainment or just, perks to keep kids busy while the doctors work. But in a pediatric unit, they serve a much higher clinical purpose. They are required psychological tools meant to actively reduce the fear and anxiety of the children. They're literally just as essential for a patient's mental well-being as the medical equipment is for their physical health. Which brings us to a really fascinating point. If a colorful room, proper bed spacing, and a simple toy can so drastically aid healing and reduce a child's fear, it forces us to look beyond the pediatric ward. What other clinical environments need a total redesign? We've seen how thoughtful decisions, right down to the paint colors and the invisible atmospheric controls, directly impact recovery and provide absolute security for families navigating incredibly tough days. Empathy and physical space intersect in powerful, measurable ways.
Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope this deep dive into the pediatric ward gave you a totally new perspective on the intersection of healthcare, safety, and environment. But it leaves us with that one big, provocative question. What other clinical environments, for adults, for the elderly, for everyone, need a total redesign? Keep asking questions about the spaces around you, and I will see you next time.